Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We're currently in Genesis chapter 38, and this is a parenthetical chapter here. We're going to see this through the as we travel through the Old Testament, and in the last chapter, we see where Joseph is sold off into Egypt. Now, Judah is going to leave his family. We're not told why, but he kind of branches off, you could say, on his own. We don't know why. But this is a parenthetical chapter that happens about 20 years. But then we're going to kind of come back to Joseph in his journey. Understand why this is important, this chapter, because Judah is the direct bloodline of Jesus. And so it's important to understand this bloodline. Judah goes off, and then we're going to see. One other thing is, remember, as we're going through, especially the Old Testament there, and especially before the law, there's some crazy stuff going on, some very weird, sinful depravity going on, and this is what God has to deal with. Man is incredibly sinful, so we see that. However, this is why the bloodline of Jesus, or the bloodline, will establish and bring Jesus in for the atonement of the world. Okay, but just keep that in mind, because there's some crazy stuff that's going on. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the Bible is agreeing with it. It's simply, okay, this is what is being reported. This is the story, how it unfolded. Then you're going to see this is how God dealt with it. Okay. All right, verse 1. And at that time, Judah, and this would be the time that Joseph is sold off. He left his brothers and settled near an Adulamite named Hirah. Okay, so he leaves again. So this is a parenthetical that the writer gives us a 20-year kind of storyline of Judah. Verse 2. There Judah saw the daughter of a Canaanite named Shua. He took her as a wife and slept with her. She conceived and gave birth to a son, and he named him And she conceived again and gave birth to a son, and named him Onan. She gave birth to another son and named him Shelah. Kind of interesting right here. You can see that Shelah is a male name, even though there's a lot of females who are named Shelah. But it was at Chizib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for Now, so we're advancing forward, right? Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and he named. Judah got a wife. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Now, Judah firstborn, was evil in the Lord's sight, and the Lord put him to death. Now, we don't know how evil what he did, but it was so evil, it says here, that the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife, perform your duty as her brother-in-law, and produce offspring to her. Now, what's interesting about this is a crazy law. This would also be incorporated into the law of Moses. And what this law basically said, and we see here some 450 years before the law, they're practicing this. So if you got a family, and you got a family of whatever, however many, and of course back then it was men, and you got a family, and you got if one of the brothers, so each brother, it was important to them the descendants of the brother, the inheritance, right? So, like in this case, if you got 4 brothers, it was important that each brother carries on his name. Okay? And that was so important to them, so that in one case, if one of the brothers die and he doesn't have seed, okay, or a child, he doesn't have a child, so that means his name would stop right there. So basically, I don't know who came up with this, and it was kind of interesting. We're going to see even how God is going to get involved with this. And like I say, it's also going to be incorporated into the Mosaic Law. Can't explain it. But, so the way to preserve and to keep the name of the deceased son, so his name could go on, which hint the genealogies, right? The next brother would go in and sleep with the wife one time, get her pregnant, and then that seed, that child, would carry on the name of the deceased brother. Okay? Again, crazy. To me, it's crazy, but, that's just the way it is. So like, for example, if my brothers, if my brother got married and he had died before he had any children, I would have been obligated to sleep with my sister-in-law to carry on seed. Okay? And again, so it makes it, again, crazy, but these are the crazy times. All right, so now when we add to this, in terms of the storyline, that Judah is someplace in a sense he shouldn't be, and in a sense he's kind of mixing where he shouldn't be. In other words, no way he should be with the Canaanites, among the Canaanites in this land, but he is. So he goes back. So the first dies, and he's married to Tamar, and we'll get to her in a moment. So then Judah says to Onan, he says, sleep with Tamar, and then perform the duty of this for your brother. Verse 9. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he released his semen on the ground, so that it would not produce offspring for his brother. What he did was evil in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. So again, I can't explain what's going on here. Notice God is even getting involved with this. Then Judah, verse 11, then Judah said to his daughter-in-law, Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he might die too, like his brother. So Tamar went to live in her father's house, right? So if she had married someone else, then she would have altered the seed, as it were. He says, now after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shinnah, died. And when Judah had finished mourning, he and his friend Haran, the Adullamite, went up to Timnah to the sheep shearers. Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear sheep. So she took off her widow's clothes, veiled her face, covered herself, and sat at the entrance of Enim, which is on the way to Timnah, for she knew that though Shelah had grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. And when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. I had a veil around her face. Now, and also remember, he haven't seen her in a few years, and plus he probably wasn't. When you see these kind of situations, and if you kind of think, well, why didn't he recognize her? Well, there's a lot of reasons why he couldn't recognize her. one being a man. Okay. But he wasn't looking to recognize her, and certainly he wasn't looking her to be in a situation where she's a prostitute. All right. Plus, her face is covered with a veil. Okay, let me go back. Verse 15 again. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went over to her and said, "Come, let me sleep with you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What will you give me for sleeping with me?" "I will send you a young goat from my flock," he replied. But she said, "Only if you leave me something with me until you send it." "And what should I give you?" he asked. He said, "What should I give you?" he asked. She answered, "Your signet ring, your cord, and the staff in your hand." So he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she got pregnant by him. Now, this is kind of shrewd of her. And if I was to one of the things that came to my mind, some of you may understand this. I'm thinking about a blue dress that a certain person saved for whatever reason. And that blue dress almost took down the president, okay? But I do digress from that. What I'm saying is that she got some evidence. And that was shrewd of her, as we're going to see, because this evidence will save her life. Okay. All right, so verse 20. Now, verse 19. So she got up and left, and then removed her veil and put her widow's clothes back on. Now, this has been a number of years now. Verse 20. And when Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get back the items he had left with the woman, he could not find her. And he asked the men of the place, "Where is the cult prostitute who was beside the road at Enam?" And they said, "There has been no cult prostitute here," they answered. So Adullamite returned to Judah, saying, "Could not find her." And furthermore, the men of that place said, "There has been no cult prostitute there." Judah replied, "Let her keep the items for herself. Otherwise, we would become a laughingstock. After all, I did send the young goat by you, but you couldn't find her." He said, "All right. Okay, so crazy times, right? Remember, there's no law. And we see the depravity of man. And then we also say this is what God is dealing with. The depravity of man right here. Okay. So, he doesn't stop to think, though, okay, what could be going on? He comes to the town. This woman is pretending to be a cult prostitute, as is listed here. We could also say a pagan prostitute. And during this time, and I said this before, most pagan religions during this time, had some kind of sexual perversion incorporated in the worship. So if husband was saying, "I'm going to go to the temple to worship," there were some orgies and stuff going on. They would also have, when you would attend these cult or temple, also temple prostitutes, pagan prostitutes there. He just assumed she was one, never asked, never whatever. She pretended to be one, and then she left. So he didn't stop to think when the men said, "Well, we know all the cult prostitutes and there ain't been one." He just doesn't kind of stop to think, well, what's up with that, right? But he's going to find out. Verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has been acting like a prostitute, and now she is pregnant. Bring her out, Judah said. Let her be burned to death. Okay. And as she was being brought out, she sent her father-in-law this message. I am pregnant by the man to whom these items belong. And she added, examine them. Whose signet ring, cord, and staff are these? Oops, right? Oops. This is kind of an oops moment, right? Again, you kind of have to go back that women were undervalued, and that's an understatement. Women were treated a step above slaves. They really didn't have rights. So one of the best options for women was to get married. But even in the marriage, you didn't have rights. So if you want to say, is this hypocrisy? Yes. Is this misogyny? Yes. Is this male chauvinism? Yes. Is it unfair? Yes. Because had she not produced the items, he would have burned her and got away with it. Even though he was the one that was whoring around himself. So because she was kind of contractually and still waiting for, it's crazy because in one sense her husband was dead, but she was kind of waiting on the one of the brothers to carry on, and that was the key. That was kind of the binding tie. That it was the key to carry on the family name, which Judah really didn't care about, since he did not give the youngest son Sheila to him. But at any rate, he feigns to be outraged, right? And so she says, hey, I'm pregnant by the man who owned these, right? Tell me who they are. So then verse 26, Judah recognized them and said, she is more in the right than I, since I did not give her my son Sheila. And he did not know her intimately again. And when the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her room, and she was giving, and as she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife took it and tied the scarlet thread around it, announcing, this one came out first. But then he pulled his hand back, and his brother came out. And then she said, you have broken out first. So he was named Perez. And then his brother, who had the scarlet thread tied to his hand, came out, and he was named Zerah. So we're going to be very interested in Perez, because he will be in the direct bloodline of Jesus. Now, you will also note that the direct bloodline of Jesus, there are 3 Gentile pagan people directly in the bloodline of Jesus. We will see this. Tamar, then later would be Rahab, then Bathsheba, and Ruth. Ruth, and then Bathsheba. So 4 non-Israelites, you could say. But we can see here Tamar is in the direct bloodline of Jesus. The direct bloodline of Jesus. So that's this parenthetical. So now what's going to happen when we go back into chapter 39, we get back to Joseph, kind of reset and go back and come up. So during Joseph's time in Egypt, we see this 20-year parenthetical that will bring us to the time of the famine. Judah will return back home, and then he will be back with his brothers. So all of this takes place about 20 years. So, all right, I will see you in the next study. All right.